Why, hello there. All right, so I'm starting a little bit early because I left early. Yes, on Monday. Sorry, I'm getting my days confused. And so I have everything ready. I have my place marked from Monday, and where we left off is the first prince arrives at Katarina's castle, and she's not impressed. He thinks she's a guy, thinks she's trying to pretend to be royal. And when she takes off her helmet and her hair falls down her back, he's staring at her in shock. I mean, this little thing is actually a female and royalty. And they are having the dinner to introduce the prince to the princess. And I'm going to go ahead and put the spoiler alert up. I'm going to add the Amazon link to the book. It is currently on sale from the 4th to the 11th. So 99 cents to get the book, and you can read along. We were almost done with chapter 3, and if you were here for last week, if you were here for last stream, then you know I don't technically put chapter 1 or chapter 2 for my chapters. All right. So I am going to start in just a moment. See if anyone else wants to hop in. I'm looking over here for the Facebook post. I don't know why it's not doing that. Let me refresh that page. There, now it's showing the 99 cents price. All right, so all right, we're getting ready to go. So Katerina is trying to ignore Eduardo. She doesn't want to get married at all, and she doesn't really like Eduardo. And she's trying to join in on the fun with her little brothers right now because they're acting up a little bit. They're having fun at this dinner. and they used to have so many fun times together. Of course, they also fought a lot. Just like any family, they fought over toys and attention. They also learned a lot from each other. Katerina shared a smile with Thomas, who was more like her in likes and hobbies. Her mother smiled at the group sitting around the table. She rubbed her stomach as she ate her dinner of soup. At 3 months pregnant, her pregnancy wasn't noticeable yet. This would be her 7th pregnancy, but 8th child. She still counted Derek's twin Rose, because to not include her was like an insult to the dead. She could almost feel Rose's spirit beside her. She felt lighter at the thought that her baby was watching over her. Maybe this child would be a daughter as well, like Julie had told her months ago during a tarot reading. She was really starting to believe in tarot cards, especially since Katerina had taken up the skill and on rare occasions did readings for the family. They were pretty accurate too. Most of the readings were of happiness or a bumpy road, such as a fall from a horse. Katerina once did a reading where a shadow fell across a card, and she saw a life flicker. That was the week that Derek had disappeared for a few hours. He had been playing in the fields and wandered into the woods. Everyone had been worried, but relieved when he was found. Ever since then, they all looked to Katerina for tarot readings, if it was something small. For the big important readings, they went to Julie in the village. The second prince arrives. The next day, Lonnie watched as Katerina snuck around the castle. Obviously, she was trying to avoid Prince Eduardo. Sighing, she got her daughter's attention and motioned her over. When Katerina made it into the queen's study, Lonnie asked, "Why, in all that is holy, are you hiding from Prince Eduardo?" "He's way too flirtatious," cried Katerina. "He's been flirting with all of the maids and even with some of the village girls that come up here to visit." "We'll have to do something about that. It won't help Mother." She really didn't think it would. "He's just a flirt. And, anyway, I don't want to get married, so why even bother?" "Katerina, you know you have to choose one." Lonnie frowned at her daughter. "Prince Eduardo might stop flirting with others if you show a bit of interest in him. He's probably just trying to make you jealous. Not to mention the fact that Prince Dimitri should be here in a few days." "Just what I need. 2 princes to fight over me." Katerina sighed and walked over to the large window in her mother's study. "Why can't life be easier?" Lonnie laughed slightly. "Because then it would be boring. An adventurous life is more exciting, but also builds character." She watched her daughter start pacing in front of the window. "Katerina, come sit down. You're making me dizzy." Katerina walked over and sat down near Lonnie. "Sorry, Mother." "Now, why don't you pick up your cross-stitch work and do that for a bit?" Lonnie followed her own advice, grabbing her cross-stitch project from the table beside her chair. Katerina reached into the basket by her chair and grabbed her project. She didn't mind cross-stitching too much. Her project was a horse peering out of a stall. As they worked, they spoke of non-important things that wouldn't stress either of them out. An hour later, Natalia joined them and began working on her project too. Natalia, I'm just curious, but are you and Frederick still trying for a baby? It's okay if you don't want to answer. Natalia froze at the reminder that she hadn't given the Crown Prince an heir in the 4 years that they'd been married. Then she relaxed. We have decided to let God handle it. If we get pregnant, we'll get pregnant. Wise words, Lonnie replied. She finished off her project and put her tools away. What do you think? It was a lovely handkerchief with a rocking horse on it. Lovely. Katerina sneaked around as she had all week. She was trying to avoid Eduardo again, but the only place that she couldn't avoid him was the dining hall. Everyone had to eat there, no excuses, unless you were sick. When Katerina was able to, she would play with her younger brothers. 13-year-old Thomas always wanted to play pirates, where Katerina was the bad pirate. Derek always wanted to play Princess in the Tower, where he had to rescue Katerina from the evil dragon. Blake just wanted piggyback rides, and he was a happy kid. Katerina stuck her head around the corner, and not seeing anyone, ran to the front door of the castle. She was going to go ride, and no one was going to stop her. It had been a very long week since that Prince Eduardo showed up. She was dreading the other prince's arrival. Outside, she didn't see the two visitors ride up the long driveway, or see that they had noticed her sneak out. Katerina laughed at the fact that she had managed to escape the flirtatious prince. The two visitors cautiously rode up to the castle, watching the girl sneak around. When she laughed, they looked at each other. The first guy asked, "Should we stop her, Prince Dimitri?" "Maybe we should at least stop her and see if she's up to no good." Dimitri watched the girl. "I wouldn't want the king and queen to be upset if she is a thief." "Come on, Dawn." He nudged Stallion closer to her and got her attention. He stared at the girl for a second before he spoke. "Excuse me. What are you doing sneaking out of the castle?" Katerina huffed. "Great, another one." "I'm trying to avoid the flirtatious Prince Eduardo." She shuddered in disgust. "Why do I have to marry a prince like that? I mean, yes, flirting can be good, but he's trying way too hard." She was ignoring her mother's words from a few days ago. The clearing of her throat had her blinking in shock. "I'm sorry. And what were you saying?" "Is he like that with all of the girls when he's supposed to be trying to woo the Princess Katerina? She's supposed to be very beautiful. Well, maybe not as beautiful as you," Dimitri said, blushing slightly. His attendant chuckled, and Dimitri mock glared at him. Katerina blushed in surprise. She didn't understand why guys thought she was so pretty, but didn't know what she looked like. Didn't people gossip anymore? Well, she knew they did, so how could a foreign prince not know what she looked like? She said. "I'm Katerina. You must be Prince Dimitri." She looked at Prince Dimitri and then at his attendant. He looked at her sharply in surprise. She wasn't dressed as a princess. She had riding pants on, and her hair was hanging free down her back. Then he replied, "I am princess." He spoke formally, as he should when speaking to another royal for the first time. Sighing, Katerina turned and walked back to the castle door. after calling for 2 stable hands. "Well, I'll take you inside to talk to father." She was frowning, and they noticed. She didn't look at them. She couldn't. Not without getting angry over the fact that the 2 princes had agreed to marry a complete stranger. Sure, she was the only princess in the world not related to either one of them, but still. She was now forced to acknowledge that she had to marry one of the 2 princes, but that didn't mean she had to like it. She had to do something about it. Maybe she could make them leave in disgust, and her country wouldn't be held responsible for breaking the contract. She smiled. That's a good idea. Now what to do? Dmitri and his attendant dismounted, handed the reins to the stable hands, and followed the princess after glancing at each other. They followed her inside the castle and to a study, wondering at the new attitude of the princess. Why was she upset that a prince was in her presence? Katerina knocked and opened the door when prompted. "Father, you have guests." She stepped aside and watched as the 2 new visitors cautiously walked past her, glancing at her from the corner of their eye. She sighed, left them with her father, and walked to the courtyard where her mother and her brother Frederick's wife, Natalia, were sitting. She flopped gracefully onto the bench next to her sister-in-law. "Katerina Agate Peterson," her mother exclaimed. "Don't flop onto things. You are a princess, so act like it." "Sorry, mother," Katerina replied, sitting up with her back straight, her shoulders back and down, her chin up, and one foot behind the other. She could have been mistaken for a statue if she was all one color and didn't move for a while. She smiled politely. Her mother nodded. "Now, what is going on that you want to flop on a bench?" Katerina waited the necessary full minute of posture control before she allowed herself to slowly relax without getting out of the proper posture position. She turned her head towards her mother. "The other prince appeared today. Mother, I don't know how I can make them leave without me having to break the contract." Natalia looked at her in horror. "You can't. Even if they are the ones to break the contract, that just means that you weren't good enough, and we would still lose everything." "Natalia," Katerina sighed, "there's got to be something." "There's not." Lonnie was upset. "You will not make a mockery of this country." "Fine," Katerina sighed. She looked away. Then she decided to test the 2 princes. It took her a few hours, but she had an idea. That night, at dinner, she wore the blue dress that she had passed up the week before. Katerina had a servant help her braid her hair into an intricate design on the back of her head. Her heels clicked on the floor as she walked down to the ground floor where the dining hall was. Like last week, everyone looked towards the door when she arrived. Why did everyone always get there so early? Just to have her make a grand entrance? She shook her head. Was she really such a cruel princess? Katerina took a deep breath and turned the corner to walk into the dining hall. She heard the gasps of awe as she stepped into view, and when she fully turned, she saw the awed look on the 2 princes and their attendants. Katerina blushed. unknowingly making herself look more beautiful. Julia stood, and the other males followed his lead. As she walked past all of them to her seat, the butler comes to pull her seat back so she can sit, and he pushes it in for her. Julius watches the visiting princes to see if they were picking up on tips on how to treat his little girl. They were staring at Katerina in shock and awe. Julius sat down, and the other males sat as well. He couldn't believe that his little girl looked so grown up. He remembered when she was a precocious little 4-year-old. Now she was 16 and eligible to be wed. As the meal progressed, Katerina couldn't look at the two princes. She didn't want to like them. She didn't want to go through this marriage contract. This was not going to be her future. But the looks they sent her made her feel warm inside. She was confused about the feeling. How could she get rid of this feeling? She decided to put her plan to get them to sever the contract into action in a few days. Her family kept her quite busy, so she wasn't able to think more on her plan for a while. She decided to put it aside until she could get them alone. In the meantime, she had to be nice to them. Katerina pulled out her tarot deck and shuffled them, thinking, what will get these two princes out of this castle? With the stack face down in the palm of her left hand, she grabbed one card and flipped it forward onto the deck before her. The Ace of Cups. It symbolized new beginnings in the emotional life, the start of a new relationship, and a passionate involvement in a creative idea very close to your heart. She flipped another card over, Death. It represented something that must end, but not necessarily a physical death. It also represented rebirth in a way. The third card she flipped over was the Wheel of Fortune, which symbolized control and no control. It also symbolized good or bad fortune, without saying which. The fourth card turned out to be the Hanged Man, which represented looking at life from a different point of view. Katerina frowned at the cards. This wasn't what she hoped to see in the cards. She flipped over one last card to see if that one would be better than the others. The Ace of Wands. It suggested action, movement, and creativity. It also symbolized a new start, a beginning full of energy and initiative. Katerina shook her head. What are the cards trying to tell me? She thought. The cards seemed to tell her that she would start a new relationship with one of the princes, that her current life at the castle would end. She'd either have good or bad fortune in whatever journey she undertook, but had no control over. That she would have to start to look at her situation differently, and that this was a time of action. Katerina shook her head. This was nothing like she wanted. She just wanted a way to get the princes to leave. She reshuffled the tarot cards, and put them away. Maybe she would try again later. She met them a few days later, and they told her that they wanted to prove that they could make this contract work. She said, very well. Eduardo, would you please go to the village and get the juiciest pears for me to eat? Dmitri, would you go to and pick the biggest and the most beautiful rose for me to give to my mother? The boys grumbled, but they both turned and left the castle, heading in separate directions. She turned around, and as she reached the sitting room, she saw an envelope addressed to her father lying on the hall table next to the door to the sitting room. Katerina grabbed the letter and walked through the halls to her father's study. She heard her father and his advisors talk about her attitude towards the marriage contract and the boys. What right did they have to talk about her having an attitude? How dare they? She had every right to be mad about the arranged marriage. She knocked abruptly, cutting off the conversation. When the door opened, she walked in past the advisor that opened the door and gave the letter to her father. Her voice was like ice when she spoke. This was in the main floor near the front sitting room. It's for you. She watched as he opened the letter and saw his face pale. Father? Julius looked up. It seems that someone is threatening us. They say that they will spill all of our secrets if we don't do what they want. His dark eyes landed on his daughter's face. What secrets? She asked cautiously. His face still pale, Julius absently sent his only daughter away, and then started speaking to his advisors again. He ignored the look she sent him, knowing that she will get over the disappointment of not knowing everything. Katerina stormed off to her wing of the castle. How can they treat her like this? They try to control her life and don't even let her know about something that may affect her in some way. The maids shied away from the princess as she stormed past them on her way to her room. Natalia stopped her with a hand on the younger girl's arm. Natalia asked, "What's wrong, Katerina?" She saw how upset Katerina was and wanted to help her. Katerina spilled the news. Father got a threatening letter, but he won't tell me what is going on. The letter said something about secrets. But what secrets? I'll see what I can find out, Natalia said. She would find out too, even if she had to have her husband do the asking. Katerina walked away and into her room. She sat down and crocheted for a while. The angrier she is, the faster she crochets. So if there was a maid in the room, they would have fled at the sight of how fast the crochet hook was moving. As she crocheted, she calmed down and her speed slowed. 30 minutes later, her mom came in to let her know that the boys have returned from where she sent them. Katerina sulked after her mom. She couldn't believe that they had come back. When she saw the boys, she took the lovely rose that Dmitri brought with a thanks and handed it to her mother. Here, mother. She smiled at the older woman and turned towards Eduardo. She didn't notice her mother's disappointed look in her direction. She took the pears from Eduardo with a thanks. She started to walk away, but her mother scolded her for only using the boys for trivial matters. Katerina stopped and looked at her mother and the two princes. They looked at her with a mixture of confusion and frustration. She could see it on their faces. Was she really such a cruel princess? But Katerina couldn't give in to her inner child. She had to push them away so that she didn't have to marry anyone. Katerina, being the selfish person that she was, didn't want to bend to her parents' will and marry. She didn't want her heart broken. She turned around and continued to walk away. Why shouldn't I treat them like that? It's not like I want to marry either of them. And maybe it would send them on their way. Maybe if one of them was like her father. But why would she even attempt to get to know them well enough to see if it were so? Eduardo watched the princess walk away. His expression showed his frustration over being basically dismissed by her. He turned to the queen. "If you'll excuse us," he said, bowing to her. The queen nodded, and after Dmitri bowed too, the two princes walked outside. How could she act so selfish? She used us. Yes, she did use us to get the rose and the pears. But maybe there's a reason for her acting like that. Dmitri sighed. I was upset when I learned that my future partner had been set up for me before I was born. Maybe she is feeling the same way, he said as they made their way to the courtyard. I know I had a year to come to terms with the situation. What about you? I also had a year to get used to the idea. Eduardo nodded to show his agreement. Still, she obviously won't choose between us on her own. We'll have to help her decide. Lonnie had said that Katerina's reading before was accurate, and that Katerina should follow the cards she drew. The two princes were soon in the courtyard of the castle, and were arguing about who the princess should marry. Prince Eduardo said that she should marry him because his kingdom was closer. He puffed up his chest, thinking himself so clever. Prince Dmitri said that she could marry him because he would treat her with respect, and he would love her for being her. He mentioned that she couldn't really be all bad. Eduardo laughed. So you would be the whipped king when she's your queen? He asked, starting the fight between the two princes. They drew their swords, and Dmitri attacked. I won't allow you to speak like that about her. Their swords met in a clash of metal. Dmitri's expression showed that he didn't think that she was really like that. Eduardo smirked at Dmitri's expression. Do you really believe that she's innocent? He laughed. Well, maybe she is, maybe she isn't. Either way, she'll be fun to live with after we are married. I'm sorry to say that you will never have the pleasure of marrying that lovely princess. They continued exchanging blows. Dmitri growled at the idea of Eduardo wooing Katerina. Even if she acted like she didn't care about us and only wanted to send us on ridiculous tasks, I still believe that she isn't really like that. I believe that she's actually kind and considerate inside. Two knights broke up the fight and sent them on their way in opposite directions. Frederick left his wife, taking a nap in the rooms. He thought over what she had asked him to do and decided that he could ask his father about whatever was going on. Walking down the hall, he noticed a letter on a pedestal that held a priceless face. Stepping over to it, he saw his father's name. He took the letter straight to his father in the family sitting room and then asked him, "What are these letters about? Please tell me." This letter demanded some sort of ransom to prevent the secret getting out. King Julius told his son a little of what was going on, but kept the most important part a secret because he was scared of what his family would think. There's something in my past that I don't want to get out, and whoever this person is knows and demands that I pay them off. The king was really worried, and everyone in the family sitting room could tell. The queen vowed to keep an eye on him, but no one knew when the next letter would show up. A few days later, Katerina was walking through the halls, thinking about the two princes and their actions since they arrived. They were both very charming towards her, but she had noticed the tension between them. Derek sat playing in the family sitting room with some of his toy soldiers. He pretended that his soldiers were escorting him through a forest, and as he moved across the sitting room, he saw an envelope hiding under the couch. He smiled brightly and grabbed the envelope. He pretended that the envelope had an invitation to a magical kingdom, and he was playing with it. He didn't open the envelope, but he was pretending that the envelope was taking him and his toy soldiers through the forest into the magic school. He was 11, but he still acted like a kid sometimes. To his family, that was just fine. They wanted him to stay a kid for a little longer. King Julius walks into the room to see his son playing with the envelope. He panicked and yelled at his son. Derek cried out, scared that he was in trouble, and everyone in the family ran in. Lonnie was holding Blake on her hip. After calmly telling her husband to not yell at their son and giving him a glare, she took the envelope and told her husband to tell them what was going on. She handed the letter over to Julius, and as he read it, she motioned everyone to sit down. Then she pulled her two youngest babies to her lap, or her side, against her barely there baby bump. Derek was a little too big for his mother's lap, but he liked cuddling with her. Julius realized that he would have to tell the family everything, including from when he was 16, and so he reluctantly did. My father was very cruel to my mother and I. He would get drunk, hitting her, and taking me to practice swordsmanship, where I would come back with cuts on my arms and legs. My sister was just a baby when my father and I went hunting on my 16th birthday. I purposefully chose a path in the woods to race on that had a jumping obstacle. My father didn't like jumping that much, so I kept him distracted as we raced along the path. When we got to the obstacle, my horse jumped over the 3-foot crevice. My father saw it at the last minute and yanked the reins back. His horse stopped abruptly, throwing him into the crevice. Julius took a deep breath. When I jumped back over the crevice, I briefly looked down at his body before grabbing his horse's reins and went home with whatever we had managed to hunt that day. I told everyone that it was a hunting accident, and everyone believed me. After her father told the story of how he killed his own father, a very cruel man, Katerina started to debate with herself on whether she would help the family out or let things go on as they were. Who would kill their own dad? Even if that dad was evil like the old king was. Natalia had come in at the last few minutes of the talk and had to be given the recap version. Katerina thought about what her mother had said to her after the long discussion that the family had just had. Lonnie had said that Katerina's reading before was accurate, and that Katerina should follow the cards she drew. Katerina paced in her room alone, and tried to decide if she wanted to go on this journey of self-discovery and justice for her father. She wondered if she would ever find the guy that was threatening her family. She also wondered if she would eventually fall in love with one of the princes, and which one would she be drawn to the most. Lonnie and Natalia seemed to think that there was only one choice for her future husband, but Katerina wasn't sure. Her father seemed to like both princes, and her brothers were unsure if they liked either prince. However, that might just be because the older brothers were protective and the younger brothers followed their lead. Thinking about everyone's thoughts on the threatening letters, Katerina decided and went to tell her family. It was past time for her to step up and help the family. As the middle child, Katerina felt that she had that little bit of freedom to do so. It was time for her to grow up, not something that she had really wanted to do just yet. She really wanted to stay a young teen for a while longer. Now she had to go on a potentially long trip and find out who dared to threaten her family. Katerina's eyes darkened at the thought of whoever might be after her family. She would make them pay. She swore that justice would be served. Not vengeance or revenge, but justice. She was so lost in thought that she bumped into Dmitri. A small brown bag fell out of his hand, and Katerina bent down to pick it up. When she grabbed it and straightened up, she looked at Dmitri. "What's this, Prince Dmitri?" "It's coffee, Princess. We sell lots of it in my country." He looked down into her blue eyes. The way the candles flickered in the hall made her eyes sparkle more than usual. Not that he was ever this close to her before now. Katerina tilted her head. "What's coffee?" Dmitri blinked in a surprisingly slow way, as if in shock. Coffee is a type of drink that helps some people stay awake when they have very important meetings or tasks to do. She nodded as if she understood how a drink could wake a person up like that. They had mostly just teas, milk, juices, and some spirits in their country. No one had ever heard of coffee before. Remembering what she had to do, Katerina excused herself politely and walked away to go find her family. She had to tell them that she was leaving. On the way, she told a maid to please gather the rest of the family in the sitting room. When she found her mother already there, she said, "Mother, I need to speak with the family. It's very important. I've called the rest of the family here." She would have to fall back on the lessons that Frederick and George gave her all those years ago. Lonnie scrutinized Katerina's face, nodded, and sat down to wait. They chatted a little as they waited, and it wasn't long before the others slowly drifted in. Katerina stood as the entire family arrived. "I have something important to say. As you know, the threatening letters keep coming. I have to find out who is sending us the letters, so tomorrow morning I will head out on a journey to find the person responsible. I figure that I have to step up and protect this family, just like the rest of you do." She swallowed hard. "I want to be able to do something real and not just sit here waiting for a miracle. It's time for me to grow up and be a part of the solution. I don't ask for permission, Father. I ask for your blessing." She looked at her father and saw the mixed emotions on his face. He was sad but proud, she saw. Then he nodded. Katerina thanked her father and went back to her room. She had a lot to do. She was going to be away from home for a long time, so she had to make sure that she packed enough clothes, enough food and water, paper and pens, and she even had to grab weapons. She wasn't going to go unprepared on this journey. She would have to fall back on the lessons that Frederick and George gave her all those years ago. They had taught her how to protect herself in a fight, how to throw punches, how to use a sword, how to shoot arrows, how to throw knives, and how to ride a horse. Katerina would miss her older brothers the most. Katerina worried as she packed. What if she was making a mistake? What if the person threatening her family came to hurt them while she was gone? What if she got hurt or killed on the journey? What if she never found out who was threatening her family? She didn't even think about what her family might be thinking right at that moment. She couldn't, or else she would never leave on the journey. Then it hit her. Maybe she should leave tonight instead of in the morning, so that they wouldn't worry as much. Or so she thought. As Katerina walked out of the room, her mother burst out in panic. What were you thinking in letting her go on her own like that? She's 16, she sobbed. Julius walked over to hold her tight. She'll be okay, my love. We just have to believe that. And it will happen. She'll come back to us safe and sound. Frederick spoke up. George and I taught her how to protect herself. She can fight with a sword, a bow, knives, and her fists. She's good, George agreed. He didn't speak much because of a girl that made fun of his stutter once when he was a kid. He outgrew the stutter and now had quite a few girls wanting to marry him. But the fear stayed with him. He knew that his family hoped that he would settle down soon, so maybe he'd find a girl out there that made him forget the past. Thomas snorted. Good. She beat me at target practice last month. He smiled. We started learning how to throw knives at the same time, too. They had started learning when Thomas was 10 and Katerina was 13. George smiled in remembrance and ruffled Thomas's hair. I started learning last year, Derek piped up, trying to make people laugh. He succeeded. Katerina was packing her bags, grabbing everything that she had thought of earlier. Her personal maid came in and asked what was going on. Katerina replied with, I'm packing to go on a journey. I will find out who is threatening my family, and I will bring justice. Her voice was firm, but not vicious or hateful, so her maid nodded and came over to help. Prince Derek and Prince Eduardo met outside the sitting room. They looked at each other and nodded curtly. Oh, pardon me. Then they walked into the room. Dmitri looked around the room and saw the king and his family sitting around. Your Majesty, you called for us? He turned his head this way and that, trying to look for Katerina. Instead of Julius answering, it was Lonnie. I want you to know, she said, that Katerina is leaving. She's going after whoever is threatening this family. Then Julius piped up with a worried look. I think you two should probably go with her. Protect her. You might even get to know her, and she might even get to know you." Frederick smirked, but watched them intently. George just stood and told them, Go after her and take care of her." As they left, he turned to his family. "Leave it. If it's meant to be, it will be." The others wanted to protest, but eventually they agreed. Eduardo and Dmitri stepped out of the sitting room and walked down the hall. "Should we go pack and follow her on this crazy journey?" "I don't think it's crazy," Dmitri replied. "But yes, I think we should go with her on this journey tomorrow morning. She might need the help." He saw their attendants and motioned them over. Dmitri told them what they were going to do, and the attendants swore that they would go too. The two younger boys ran to get started on packing their own things. Dmitri turned to Eduardo. "Let's get packed as well, shall we? The princess won't wait for us to pack in the morning." He grinned. "Sure," Eduardo nodded. "I can't let you have all the fun and woo the princess." He smirked. Neither one of the princes saw the figure walking closer to where they were, having overheard their conversation. Her journey begins. Katerina snuck out of the castle that evening instead, and through the village. She had stopped to get her horse. She wanted to leave before anyone realized. She didn't want a big goodbye. Turning, she took one last look at her home. The sun high above the 5-story palace. Flags waved from each of them. She slowly walked through the village, gently twisting through the slight crowd. She wanted to get out of the village quickly. A figure placed a white envelope in the stables near the guard room, hoping that someone would find it in the morning. The figure had overheard the princess telling her family that she would leave in the morning, so he hoped that her family would receive this after she was already gone, just so they would panic and stop her. A guard walked through the castle swiftly. He made it to the king's study and knocked. When he was told to come in, he did and said, "I'm sorry to bother you, your majesty, but this was found in the stables." He handed the envelope over and watched the king's face pale. "Is everything all right, my king?" "No," said Julius. He opened the letter and took a calming breath. "Someone is threatening our family, and we must find out who it is. This letter says that our daughter might meet an untimely end if she continues on this journey." His use of the royal we went unnoticed. "The princess is on a journey? Shall I gather men to bring her back to safety?" Julius shook his head. "No. She leaves tomorrow morning. I sent the two princes and their attendants to follow after her tomorrow, to see her through the journey. This is something that she needs to do. She stepped up to help our country, and I respect her for that." Katerina's maid heard the two princes talking as they walked to the rooms. They were talking about following Katerina, so she walked over to them. "Excuse me, your highnesses, but if you want to follow her, you might want to hurry up. She has already left." Dmitri nodded. "Thank you." The maid curtsied. "You're welcome." Then she left. Dmitri, Eduardo, and their attendants slowly followed Katerina at a distance. They had also stopped to get their horses, but weren't going to catch up with her until they all left the village. They slowly made their way through the village, leading their horses behind them. They nodded to the villagers as they passed them, but didn't stop. It was night when they left the safety of the village gate, and they followed Katerina to a river, where they made themselves known to her. What are you doing here? Katerina asked. I almost killed you. She put away the knife she had drawn when she heard the noise of the horses following her. Eduardo looked at her. We are going with you. We want you to get to know us, and we want to get to know you, and we will help you find out who is threatening your family. Dmitri shook his head at the way Eduardo said it, but he agreed. While I don't agree with his wording, I do agree that we need to work together. We don't want anything happening to you. Katerina was skeptical, but nodded anyway. She led them to her camp by the river and spoke to the two attendants while the princess got settled. She even started to help the attendants, not noticing that Dmitri was taking care of his own horse. So, what was it like working for these two? She asked. Dmitri's attendant, a boy named Don, smiled. Prince Dmitri is great. He really takes care of his people, and he practices with the army all the time. Don looked at her briefly before going back to brushing his horse. He's going to make a great king one day. Eduardo's attendant, an even younger boy named Luis, looked slightly nervous. Prince Eduardo is good too. He works really hard to make sure we are trained well. He kept his face hidden as he worked on his horse. He didn't want her to get too suspicious of his actions, which only made her more suspicious. Katerina didn't remark on his actions, but she made a commitment to watch his reactions. She rubbed the horses' necks and faces, laughing as they butted their heads against her chest. Dmitri called her back over to the campsite. He had beans and ham cooking. He also had a container of hot tea ready for them. That was quick, Katerina exclaimed. He laughed. It was nothing. It was already cooked, just needed heating up. He watched her as she washed her hands in the river and walked over to the campsite. Katerina sat down and was offered 2 bowls of ham and beans, but didn't know which one she should grab. She closed her eyes and reached out to grab a bowl. That way she didn't know who offered the bowl she grabbed until she opened her eyes. Finally holding a bowl, she opened her eyes to find a smirking Eduardo and a slightly smiling Dmitri. Looking at their hands, she noticed that Dmitri still had a bowl. So she had grabbed Eduardo's offering. Huh. She pulled the bowl closer and said, It was the only fair way to choose. Don't fight over my choices. She was looking into the bowl as she spooned up a portion, so she didn't see the looks the princess exchanged. The attendant snickered at the rivalry of the two princes, but quieted when at the glare from Eduardo. Apparently, he didn't like them laughing at a silly situation, so they stayed quiet except to talk about the food or the horses. As they all ate, Katerina listened to the night sounds and heard the birds sing good night as the wind rustled the leaves of nearby trees. She looked at the fire, glowing brightly in the dark and lighting everyone's face. The smell of the ham and beans permeated the air around them and made her stomach growl, even as she ate bite after bite of her dinner. The ham had been salted for hours, it tasted like, before it had been brought on the trip and added to the beans. It was so good that when her bowl was empty, she asked for more. Dmitri chuckled as he filled her bowl. He had heard her stomach growling. Good? Great. She blushed when he smiled in response. So, could you please tell me a little bit a little about yourselves." Eduardo jumped at the chance. Sure. He didn't like the fact that she was paying Dimitri more attention, but he didn't say anything about it. "I am the oldest of 3. I have 2 younger sisters, Mirabelle and Julianne. I also enjoy training with the guards when I get the chance, but I'm usually helping my father with the running of my country, or speaking to my great uncle about the past." "Do you have any hobbies?" she asked. "I like hunting, and I'm pretty good with a sword. I like going to and participating in tourneys." Eduardo smirked slightly. "Maybe I could show you my skills someday." Katerina made a non-commitment sound and turned to Dimitri. Dimitri smiled. "I'm the oldest of 5, with another on the way. I have 4 sisters, Maria, Catherine, Natalia, and Tatiana. I train with our army almost every day. When I'm not working with them, I'm helping my mother with the girls or walking around the closest village to help them out." "Do you have any hobbies?" she asked Dimitri. He laughed. "I love horseback riding myself by myself when I get the chance. I hunt, go camping, go target practicing, and I love reading." He sent Eduardo a look when the guy snorted out a laugh. Then he turned back to Katerina. "What are your hobbies?" She smiled. "I love reading, crocheting, tarot readings, and painting. However, I also like horseback riding and a couple of other things. I'll get into those when we know each other better." She brushed off their protests. "I don't feel comfortable revealing everything so soon." Eduardo frowned. Dimitri smiled. "That's okay. It's actually pretty understandable." He put away what little was left of the food. "You'll get to know us on this journey. Let's go to sleep. We have a long trip ahead of us. We'll take turns keeping watch." "Good idea," Katerina started to say. "No. I mean, we guys will stand watch. You need your rest." Dimitri frowned at her. Her father and brothers wanted them to keep an eye on her and protect her. He would protect her with his life. She opened her mouth to say that she could help out, but Don gently put his hand on her mouth. And that is the end of today's reading. So, what do you think? It's like, yeah, I left you on a little bit of a cliffhanger. I have 4 more chapters to read. Let's see. Yeah, I have 4 chapters to read on Friday. And it looks like I might leave you on not quite as much of a cliffhanger next time, but still a cliffhanger. Actually, 5 chapters next time. But what did you think of today's reading? Did you enjoy it? Was it going too fast? Was it going too slow? What did you think about the elements of the portion that I read to you today? I'll let you comment below while I put this away. All right, well, no one's answering, but that's okay. You can answer in the comments below, and I shall see you Friday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. That's 2 p.m. Central and 3 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, so I shall see you Friday. All right, bye-bye.